wake you. I'm just looking for a doctor. There's nothing to worry about.
Stewardess, I think the man sitting next to me is a doctor.
Sir, excuse me, sir. I'm sorry I have to wake you. You a doctor?
That's right.
They are displaying a high level of obsession of me. That's creepy. That's alarming. That's sick. In the words of my late uncle, this is fruit booty behavior. He would call this entire group a bunch of fruit booties.
Greetings. Those are the words of our beloved friend, the always classy Dr. Kelly Richardson. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that someone offered a mild and respectful disagreement with you on a particular topic. And imagine that you replied with threats of litigation and then name-calling. Then imagine being surprised that such somehow resulted in that person taking a closer look at what you teach. And then imagine thinking that maybe more name-calling might be a good idea. Oh well. Whatever the case, in this video, I'd like to explore a recent show by our gentle friend titled The Spirit of Benita Butrell. More specifically, I'd like to mainly focus on the portion of that video which attempted to discuss the case for Arabic on one of the pews. That's going to be the bulk of this video. A slight bit will be on other topics from that same video, but the majority of it is going to be on Kelly Richardson's attempt to discuss the case for Arabic on one of the pews in that particular video, The Spirit of Benita Butrell. So let's begin with his segment arguing that I manipulated the professors who concluded or suggested that a Quranic phrase appears on one of the pews. Here we go. Listen to this.
Listen to Abu's Ace of Diamonds.
The second image I attached to each email was this one, which is the same pew, just with some highlights added to guide the eyes, so to speak. 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 The second image I attached was this one. The same pew, just with some highlights added to guide the eyes, so to speak. Simple question. Why did he feel the need to, in his own words, guide the eyes of the professors he sent the images to? If he's so confident in his wild assertions that there's Quran passages written on the pews, why did he feel the need to send a superimposed image to the professors? In the legal realm, what Abu did is called leading the witnesses. If he was truly seeking an honest assessment on the pews in question, he would have simply sent an image without any superimposed markings. He would not have made any Arabic references. Okay, so Dr. Kelly asks why I sent a photo with highlights to the different scholars. Well, honestly, my honest answer is because that's what they did when they wrote to David Booniss. Dr. Kelly's cohort likewise sent highlighted images. And to show this, let's return to that infamous Boom Church panel discussion from last November. A significant portion of it is shared at this Facebook post, which you see on your screen, and a link to which I'll share in the video description. Now, as you watch this, remember that our friend, the good doctor, said that sending a highlighted image is somehow indicative of a lack of confidence in one's own position, or constitutes, quote-unquote, leading the witness, or shows that one is not truly seeking an honest assessment of the relevant pew. Keep that in mind as we pick up at the point where William Brown discusses the emails which were sent to David Booniss. Here, take a look at this.
Got his email, so this is, I'm showing on the screen, okay? I'm showing, you see his name here. This is just a screenshot. And we had several conversations. I didn't show everything in the conversation because there was some things we talked about and some things that he had that's pretty much, none of anybody's business, but we just deal with the facts of dealing with the pews and the interpretation of getting to the understanding of it. So I emailed him. You see, he emailed me back, okay? And so this is the title, and you see there was a response. So this is Benea's work, okay? This is what I forwarded to him, that what Benita had been working on, looking at, all right? And I'll have Benita to kind of explain some of the process and things that he worked through. What you see on the screen here is also what I was telling you about the students, brothers that I know that I have a relationship with in Israel. They were working on their thing as well. And so they kind of enhanced it. So I kind of created like kind of a package. I wanted to send Benea's work and I want to send their work so that way the characters can be brought out even more. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So I sent him, this is a part of the package again, and this is Benea's part that I sent him as well in the packaging. So
all right, so not only did he send images with highlights, but also note that this portion here, right here on the right, those are suggested letters. They even went so far as to suggest particular letters and letter combinations in the emails they sent to Bunis. Note that I didn't send any letters to any of the scholars that I wrote to. I didn't suggest any letters. There was nothing in my email that said, hey, maybe it's this letter, maybe it's that letter, maybe it's a sin, maybe it's an aleph and a lamed. Never did any of that. They suggested letters. I didn't. And that raises a question. Is Dr. Kelly using even scales? Does our friend, the good doctor, have a consistent standard? Or does he have one standard for his group and a different standard for us? In light of their past accusations that the goalposts had been moved, perhaps it should be noted that they didn't seem to hold to this rule about highlighted images constituting dishonest manipulation last November. Rather, this seems to be a new rule which they've introduced just this month.
This one, changing the rules, changing the rules suddenly. No, my friend, no. Don't play these games, This one not nice, my friend.
Whatever the case, let's move on to the next segment of Dr. Kelly's videos.
Captain, how soon can you land?
I can't tell.
You can tell me I'm a doctor.
No.
The email sent to the professors is loaded with primers. Throughout the email he sent to the professor and the attachments, the professor would subconsciously choose the number 55. In other words, make the conclusion of Arabic writing on the pews prior to actually viewing the images. In paragraph 1 of Abu's email, he made a distinction between two groups. Those who say the writings on the pews is Hebrew and the other group who says it's Arabic.
Okay, quick question. Why is that an issue? Is it not true that different people have proposed different languages for the pews? And is Dr. Kelly honestly going to say that such was never mentioned in the past emails which were sent forth from his side or at least aired on some of his previous shows? Maybe we can get into that a bit more in the future. And honestly, in my email to Joffrey Khan, after he concluded that it was Arabic on the pew, I even then brought up Hebrew, saying, are you sure it's not Hebrew? What do you think the possibility of that is? Whatever the case.
Paragraph 2, line 2, the third sentence says, the second image shows the same pew with highlights as part of one person's attempt to elucidate what might be there. In the same sentence, in the parentheses says, and the second image is in a different color because one person suggested it might be the end of a different sentence. This is where the manipulation kicks in. The Roman Catholic Al-MaseeHee, a Manhattan, made it a point to use generic phrases such as one person. This will mislead any onlooker, including professors, into thinking that this was a group effort, misleading the professors to thinking that there is multiple people within the Arabic group providing inputs, and this information provided is based on the people in that group.
Okay, let me interject here with two quick points. First, I actually did consult with others about what appears on that particular pew. One gentleman did offer some suggestions that I had not previously considered. Now, the person that I'm referring to isn't a Christian apologist. In fact, he's not even a Christian. But this, so I don't. It's not worth saying who he was. I mean, nobody knows him anyway. But the salient point is that I did not come up with my proposed reading all by myself. And there really was a suggestion that the marking to the right of my initial proposed reading, al-Ikhlas, looked like a sin, precisely the letter that one would expect to find if that position, one would expect to find a sin there, precisely to the right of al-Ikhlas, if this was taken from the last chapter of the Quran, Surat An-Nas, and it was an interesting suggestion, and that's why I included it. Secondly, putting my proposed reading aside and putting aside the people I discussed this with, there's still other people who have proposed Arabic readings for the pews, or at least propose that Arabic appears on the pews. And this includes people I have had no interaction with. For example, back in the fall of 2018, NYU held a symposium titled Beyond Islamophobia. And one of the speakers there was Crystal Truscott. And likewise, she proposed that Arabic appears on the pews. So just for the historical record, consider this clip from that symposium.
In various churches and wound up in Savannah, Georgia. At First African Baptist Church. And it's kind of a story that's somewhat known now. There's plenty of scholars who've done beautiful research, on the presence of Muslims and enslaved Muslims here in America, although the stories still need to be more told. But one of the things that you find is that a lot of these churches built by enslaved peoples built facing east, facing Mecca. Right? And so I often like to say that the Black church is one of our first examples of interfaith and multi-faith spaces, right? But if we don't know the sample, right, then we miss that. And then we end up looking at history as this monolithic spiritual space that it puts us in the position of having a lost opportunity of learning so much more. So this church in Savannah, Georgia, these pews here that you see in the balcony were built by enslaved people, and they have Arabic writing on the side of the pews, from the people who were enslaved from West Africa, practicing Muslims who this church became their worship space because that was the space. Can you go to the next picture? It gets a little bit closer. But again, I want to go back to the sample because before now, and there's been some, there are ongoing conversations about this, even amongst the church itself, the Arabic writing would be referred to as Hebrew cursive. Right? It would be referred to as West African inscription, right? Which is all, those are not, we could talk about those terms in various number of ways. But the point is that what does it mean that people are actively inserting faith, right, and cultural identity in a space that has become so much of a bedrock of what we understand performance traditions that are connected to activism and to social organizing and uplift, that we have now. So I'll pause. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
Now, I'm not saying you have to just agree with the position of Ms. Truscott, the position that she took in that clip. Rather, I share it only to show that our friend, Dr. Kelly, is mistaken when he says it would be misleading to give the impression that multiple people have proposed that Arabic is on the pews. On the contrary, it really is the case that multiple people, independently of each other, have come to that conclusion. But whatever the case, let's get back to the good doctor's video.
Lastly, the footnotes. The Roman Catholic Al-MaseeHee made it a point to add additional primers in an attempt to seal the deal with the professor's assessment. In the footnote, he included the link of the First African Baptist Church and the Arabic reference on the site. He also included the link and information about slaves in America, was able to write portions of the Quran he pushed in his earlier videos he made about the pew.
To be honest, that text, which is currently at the University of Pennsylvania, is relevant to the topic. We have a real example of one of the smaller suwar at the end of the Quran being written from memory by a slave in the Americas. It has relevance to the question of what appears on the relevant pew because, something that Dr. Kelly and his side hasn't brought up in their attempts to attack this hypothetical Arabic reading, something they haven't brought up, but I brought up, is that the biggest knock against the hypothetical reading I proposed is that the alif lam in ilah is very different from the alif lam in the definite article of an-nas. There's an inconsistency there in terms of how the alif lam is written, in these two different positions, assuming that's what it states. And yet, when we examine this text from the University of Pennsylvania, we have a real-world example of a slave writing Quranic material from memory and taking what can politely be described as somewhat of an inconsistent approach to the writings of precisely those letters, alifs and lams, in the text. They're written in drastically different ways, different heights, and there's also situations where one letter or the other is neglected and omitted in a place where it should appear. But let's put that aside. Let's put aside the scholars I wrote to, Getting back to the subject of multiple people proposing Arabic for the pews, it's worth noting that as some know, Henry Louis Gates' recent documentary for PBS titled The Black Church had a brief segment in which a linguist from Harvard looked at the pews and concluded that at least Arabic script, Arabic writing, appeared on the markings. He didn't necessarily endorse Arabic language, and that's an important distinction. But here's the clip.
The people who built these pews paid homage to Christ, but also left a surprising trace of another African religious past, Islam.
This is Arabic type of writing.
It's amazing that it survived.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure that if Christians knew that it was a Muslim, they would have just painted it over. Or something.
Maybe. Well, those who also wrote this, they may be Christian themselves. But for them, religion is a continuity. Different ways of maybe worship, but it's the same God, the same principle. And it was written to be a legacy for the future generation.
Now, again, I'm not saying you have to agree with this gentleman in that clip, Boubacar Diakite, but the point is that it's not just scholars under the influence of my emails who are reaching the conclusion that Arabic appears on at least some of the pews, or at least one of the pews. You know, some who are quite familiar with Arabic and who I personally have had no contact with also reached that conclusion, or at least similar conclusions. So, you know, Dr. Kelly's representation of this subject was less than accurate, to put it mildly, with all due respect to our gentle friend, the good doctor. Whatever the case, let's now move on to Dr. Kelly's appeal to a couple more scholars. In his video, he introduces some emails from other scholars. Here, listen to this.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
What we did was send emails to over 20 professors who specializes in the Near East languages. Also, we sent an image of the pew in question minus any added marks. We also made it a point not to include any third-party references to Arabic, Hebrew, or any other languages such as the church website. We received responses from over 10 professors who emphatically stated that the writings on the pews is not Arabic. But we did not stop there. We then sent them a follow-up email with the superimposed image Abu created, and their responses were the same. A couple of them took it a step further by questioning the motives of the person who added the superimposed markings. Unfortunately, due to the foolishness of how the previous professors were treated, I am only including their first name, their response, and their area of expertise. I'm just going to highlight a couple. This is a quote from Ian, who is an associate professor of Arabic and comparative literature. It's not Arabic, if that's what you're asking. It vaguely resembles Arabic, but it's clearly not. This is the quote from Professor Shaw from the Department of Islamic Studies. The letters look like a sequence of signs resembling a Hebrew cursive script.
Okay, first, let me say that you don't have to invoke secret scholars to arrive at at the point of someone saying they don't see Arabic on the relevant pew. I myself shared an email from Mohsen Gudarzi, who explicitly said that he doesn't think Arabic appears on the pew. And I also shared, when I appeared on Orthodox Moore's show, I shared an email from Conrad Dali, who took roughly that position. He didn't explicitly say there's no Arabic on the pews, but he said he didn't see anything on that particular pew. And it's relevant to hear that from Conrad Dali because he himself he's done work in the area of Quranic translation. He was one of the men who worked on the very popular Quranic translation known as the Study Quran. As for that other email, which Dr. Kelly showed, apparently from someone named Shaul, really, honestly, we should be way past the point of invoking secret scholars or offering email fragments, much less, this expectation that we simply trust Dr. Kelly and his team. Let's go over the history in this regard. Note the following. We couldn't trust his team's representation of their correspondence with David Bunis. Then, too, they only showed a portion of their correspondence with Bunis and badly misrepresented him. Bunis himself said that he was misrepresented. And they still haven't shown the entire correspondence with Bunis. And now we have to ask them to show the entire correspondence or more of their correspondence with this new secret scholar, allegedly named Shaul. Moving on, We couldn't trust his channel when it presented a new correspondence with an alleged Tel Aviv-based professor of Hebrew named Richard Katz. Beyond that, we couldn't trust the claim that those who disagreed with him were placed on a secret government watch list and that it was the government which was trying to flag videos that disagreed with him. Anybody remember that? Beyond that, we couldn't trust his channel when it presented an alleged newspaper article from some newspaper supposedly called Israel Daily News, nor could we trust his representation of, what happened to this alleged article. So, with all due respect to him, with all due respect to our gentle friend, the good doctor, he should neither ask us nor expect us to simply trust him now.
Trust me, I'm the doctor.
Acting as though there hasn't been a pattern of issues which undermined trust and continuing to lack transparency is frankly unhelpful. Now, let's take a look at the next portion of his video.
I want to make this clear. Arabic is a cursive language. It is not written the same way as cursive Hebrew. In every form of Arabic script, the letters are connected. That's Arabic 101. Notice how the Roman Catholic al-MaseeHee, Amanhatani, never gives an actual letter-by-letter breakdown as I did on the pews in question. Instead, he makes an assertive effort to show visual comparisons of writings of Arabic calligraphy. You will not find a single video of anyone in this UA group giving a letter-by-letter transliteration of the pew in question as I did. What he and faith...
I have to say, the claim that I have not given a letter-by-letter transliteration of my proposed reading of the relevant pew is, honestly, it's surprising. I'm even tempted to say it's shocking. It leaves me to wonder how closely our friend, the good doctor, has watched the relevant videos. In my video from last December, titled The Case for Arabic on a Pew Revisited, I devoted about 12 minutes to discussing each character. I give a long and detailed, look at the proposed reading. All right. So too, in my original video on the subject from October of 2019, my original video when I first proposed, a hypothetical Arabic reading for that pew, I discussed each letter in that hypothetical reading. I even gave a transliteration at the end. And that video was played by Brother Berean when I appeared on his show in mid-November. But if Dr. Kelly would like me to clearly lay out each letter, I'll do so again now, and I'll do it even more clearly. I'll try to be even more clear this time. Here's what I originally and primarily proposed.
Alif, Lam, Ha, Alif, Lam, Nun, Alif, Sin.
And that spells Ilahin Nas, the God of mankind. That's what I had originally proposed when I first put forward my hypothetical case. And then later on, in a slightly adapted form, I also proposed that a final scene appeared before the start of that. So that's what I proposed in my hypothetical case for Arabic on a pew. Now, what you see on your screen is a clear computer-generated printed form. Obviously, I was proposing a handwritten form, a somewhat shaky or sloppy, perhaps quasi-calligraphic form like this. And that fits on the relevant pew quite well. It fits perfectly, it seems to me. Now, I want to say that if anyone feels that the proposed handwritten form looks a bit different from the clear computer-generated form, that printed form, note that handwritten Arabic can look different, very different at times, from printed Arabic. For example, this is a document written by a Shi'i scholar in Iraq, I believe in Najaf, right? And just to quickly look at the Quranic phraseology in the opening of this document, it's obvious that the handwritten style differs from a computer-generated printed form, of the same phraseology, the same letters, same words. And that's, that handwritten text was written with pen and paper, and it was written by a scholar who might have written thousands of pages of Arabic over the course of his lifetime. Now, imagine instead someone trying to carve or scratch handwritten Arabic into a pew or a wooden board. That could easily be a person who doesn't have much experience scratching Arabic into wood. So we should make even more leeway for it being, a bit sloppy. But, here's a question I'd like to ask Dr. Kelly. How could three different scholars, independently of each other,
arrive at al-Ikhlas as a possible reading?
You don't know. You're not a doctor.
Remember that Cambridge's Geoffrey Kahn concluded that al-Ikhlas appeared. Samar Ali and Mahan Mirza somewhat more hesitatingly offered al-Ikhlas as a possibility. Dr. Kelly claims I manipulated those different professors, but remember, unlike his team, I didn't suggest any letters. I didn't suggest, any specific text. So that raises the question, how could 3 different men arrive at the same string of characters independently of one another? The honest answer is that the relevant markings look like the relevant string of characters. What appears on that pew does look somewhat like al-Ikhlas. Now, if you want to say the markings can look like that string of Arabic characters without Arabic actually appearing on the pew, I'll wholeheartedly agree with you. I agree with you. It doesn't, it's not, I myself am a skeptic of the claim that Arabic appears on the pews. But that establishes a methodological point. If you're going to say that the markings, can look like Arabic characters, but that doesn't mean Arabic is actually present, then by the same token, markings looking like Hebrew or Ge'ez characters does not mean Hebrew or Ge'ez is actually present. And this brings us back to a question which was asked earlier. Is Dr. Kelly using even scales? Or does he have a much stricter standard for Arabic than he does for Hebrew and Ge'ez? And speaking of Ge'ez, Dr. Kelly's video repeated his appeal to Ephraim Isaac, to specifically Professor Isaac's statements in the documentary Cryptic Quest. This was addressed in my video titled Ge'ez on the Pews, Discussing Methodology with Dr. Kelly. I hope that our friend, the good doctor, or his supporters will grapple with the points made in that video. But aside from his appeal to Ephraim Isaac, Dr. Kelly also appealed to Richard Saracen's statements in that same documentary, Cryptic Quest. So let's play that portion of Dr. Kelly's recent video.
Then that would look like a cursive top. As it is, that's right. As it is, it also, I have to see this closer up, but it also looks like a closer. Okay. However, nothing else on this panel really looks like a Hebrew. When you have something that looks like a Hebrew letter, it's in a context of things that don't look like Hebrew letters. So that the issue is, again, the issue is not the individual sign, it's what the signs add up to.
With all due respect to our beloved friend, Dr. Kelly, I fear that he may have missed the nuance of what Professor Saracen was attempting to say, what he was saying. Professor Saracen was essentially saying the same thing that I've been saying since 2019, and even before that. But as far as my video is concerned, this is the same thing I've been saying. Certain markings may resemble Hebrew characters. I took that position from the beginning. But that alone does not demonstrate Hebrew is actually present. You need a coherent string of characters to conclude that Hebrew is present. Preferably a phrase. Otherwise, it's very much an open-ended question, and it's yet to be demonstrated. But here, listen to this portion again. Listen again to what Professor Richard Saracen said.
When you have something that looks like a Hebrew letter, it's in a context of things that don't look like Hebrew letters. So that the issue, the issue is not the individual sign, it's what the signs add up to.
And this again brings us to the question of whether Dr. Kelly is using even scales. If markings resembling individual Hebrew characters is sufficient for concluding Hebrew is present, then so too markings resembling individual Arabic characters should likewise be sufficient for concluding Arabic is present. But again, it seems that our friend, the good doctor, has 2 different standards. It's a rather obvious double standard. Beyond that, if anyone wants to try to, interpret Professor Saracen's words differently, we have further clarification now. Garfield Reed actually wrote to him for clarification, and this was the message that Professor Saracen wrote back. Quote, "Dear Mr. Reed, please forgive me for not getting back to you in a timely fashion. I also had a lot on my plate over the past 3 weeks. Reverend Alvin Elmore in Chicago had introduced me to the pew markings in the First African Baptist Church a little over 6 years ago, and I had a chance to inspect them in person when my wife and I were in Savannah in May of 2015. There is no question in my mind that the carvings on the pews are intentional and are meant to be a kind of script. They are not Hebrew, though some individual markings are similar to the formation of some Hebrew letters. There are no Hebrew words discernible there. Some of the markings bear some similarity to Arabic script, but here too I can't find anything consistent, though I am not fluent in Arabic. Still, Arabic is written entirely horizontally and all of the letters in a single word are conjoined. I did not find that consistently on the pews either. My memory of your email was jogged just now when my wife and I were watching PBS's documentary series, The Black Church. This is our story, this is our song, on PBS streaming. We missed the live airing last month, which includes a brief segment on the First African Baptist Church. There, one of Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s informants, unidentified, indicates that the glyphs on the pews are Arabic and attest to the African Muslim heritage of some of the congregants. That is certainly likely with respect to the background and intent of those who carved these glyphs into the pews. But once again, I do not believe that there are any discernible or decipherable Arabic words there. Regrettably, I could not have sustained a 45 to 90-minute interview with you on this topic. My reading of the glyphs on the pews is contained in its entirety in the 2 paragraphs above, and is likely to have disappointed some of your listeners. Still, as I noted, I have no doubt that these carvings are intentional and were someone's, or more than one person's perhaps, attempts to simulate cursive writing, whether of Arabic or of English. I doubt that they would have experienced Hebrew script. This is the conclusion that I shared with Reverend Elmore as well. It was a privilege to have spent time in this beautiful historical and sacred space in Savannah, a testament to the faith of its founders and worshipers, both then and now. May its members go from strength to strength. With my very best wishes and embarrassed apologies for the delay, Richard Saracen. End quote. So that settles that. It's very clear that Dr. Richard Saracen, Professor Richard Saracen, likewise, like me, said that some of the markings look like, Hebrew cursive characters, but he doesn't think Hebrew actually appears on the pews, okay? So there's a difference between saying this marking resembles a character from the script and saying that meaningful language, appears on the pew. And putting that aside, now, before closing this video, I'm going to touch on one last topic. I honestly think the video might be better off without it, as it's a bit more infantile, even more infantile than where we've been going so far. But I'm going ahead with this section because it may still be worthwhile to cover it. So in this last section, listen to our gentle friend, Dr. Kelly Richardson, claiming that he challenged all who disagree with him to a debate, that he would single-handedly debate all of them at the same time, and that every last person turned it down and ran, taking the cowardly way out. Listen to this.
Why I challenge the entire UA group to an open discussion to compare my behavior with the behaviors of their entire group.
So I just wanted to put that challenge out there to you, Brother Berean. And if any of them want to take the challenge, set a date and I'll be here. And they bring all their behaviors. And the one caveat is the requirement that I have, that they all have to show their face and use their real names when we have the discussion.
Man, you was going good for a minute.
I'm not giving them no way out.
Gets the yet unheard of Zorro snap in Z formation.
Needless to say, they took the cowardly way out.
First off, let's be clear. Let's be clear about when Dr. Kelly Richardson put forth this supposed challenge, right? It was originally on Berean show on the 22nd of December, 2 days after the videos exposing the Richard Katz fiasco had dropped. That's what people wanted to discuss. They wanted to discuss the existence of Richard Katz, and it was obvious to most that this bit about challenging people to a group debate or a one-man versus a group debate on a completely different subject was nothing more than an attempt to draw attention away from the actual subject at hand. And that subject it pertained to the invoking of a non-existent scholar to buttress their position on the pews. Secondly, there are certain people out there who talk about quote-unquote UA, quote-unquote urban apologists, but it's unclear what they have in mind. And it becomes, for certain people, that phrase, urban apologists, or that acronym UA, becomes this sort of broad brush for them to paint all these different people, all who disagree with them, into a vague grouping. Now, while the debate challenge was a distraction, even if one were to attempt to follow Dr. Kelly down that rabbit trail, it's hard to imagine how one is supposed to meaningfully discuss this shadowy collective, that exists in the good doctor's imagination. And honestly, one hint that Dr. Kelly's definition of quote-unquote urban apologists, one hint that his definition is completely unique is the fact that his definition excludes Nephronidi, yet includes Garfield Reed. Consider this bit of wacky fun from that same month.
Let's deal with the revealing of the mass urban apologist. This person apparently has replaced Nephronidi as she was abruptly removed from this group. This person has been very active behind the scenes. So who is this mass urban apologist? No, this is not the new urban apologist. This is another mask. Let's try this again. The masked new urban apologist is the one and only, the atheist Garfield Reed.
Okay, so I hope that's clear. I mean, saying Nephronidi is not an urban apologist, but Garfield Reed is, it's hard to take seriously, and it really justifies us asking, how does Dr. Kelly even define urban apologists? But putting that aside, if we can be serious for a moment, since Dr. Kelly insisted on bringing up alleged debate challenges and insisted on calling people names, it's worth noting that there was a person who offered to debate Dr. Kelly, and that was Vocab Malone. Last October, on Berean's channel, Vocab invited Dr. Kelly to a debate on the subject of the Pews, which is the central point of disagreement here, and Dr. Kelly turned him down. Here, let's listen to their exchange from last October.
I don't want to take down videos. What I would like to do is, are you willing to debate? I'm offering you a challenge right now. Would you debate me on Berean's platform? Is the writing on the pews, is it Hebrew? I would like to offer you a challenge right now to debate me one-on-one. Is the writing on the pews in the church Hebrew? Will you do that? Yes or no?
Come on, Pastor Kelly.
I mean, again, what where are we going at with that? I'm a Hebrew Israelite.
If you're going to make a video about it and say,
this is what you take.
Hold on, Pastor.
Can you just let us talk for a minute and exchange?
Well, I want y'all to talk one at a time. I don't mind y'all talking.
Will you debate me, yes or no?
I'm not going to debate you because I don't have to confirm myself to you. That's my point. That's the part that you're not getting. Why do I have to prove that to you? I don't have to prove who I am to you. And that's the point that you miss. I'm not going to debate you about what's on the pews. I'm not going to debate. I don't have to prove anything to you. And that's the point that you're missing. That's the point that you're missing. Did you hear what I said?
The whole Pew thing was left up in the air?
Huh?
You don't think the whole Pew thing was left up? I think those are two things that the community was looking for that was left up in the air. That and the whole thing with Sister Nephi and getting back with Zondervan and Minister Dante and a few things that were left up in there. Do y'all think we can ever revisit that? What is he saying?
Can I do this here?
I want to respond to that sign because he holding up a sign that says not about lineage, it's not about language, but he sure did throw his Sicilian culture in there a second ago. He threw his lineage in there.
Come on, let her go. Come on.
Can I just say this real quick? I can show you even the people there in the comments that they made. So where I'm getting at is I don't have to prove
he said no, he don't want to debate. All right, go ahead.
Anything to this guy, and that's the point that he's missing. I don't have to prove anything to him. I have the proof.
Now, when that happened, we didn't ridicule Dr. Kelly or, accuse him of cowardice as he's attempting to do now. In fact, consider how I commented on him declining Vocab's debate challenge that week. Consider how I discussed it.
All right. Let me first say that I personally have no intention of disparaging Kelly Richardson for declining Vocab's invitation to debate. I fully recognize that debates are not everyone's cup of tea. Debates are not for everyone. Some might prefer other forms of dialogue. That said, in all fairness, I want to ask that we be honest for a moment and acknowledge that the reaction would have likely been very different if that exchange had gone in the opposite direction. What I mean is, imagine if Kelly Richardson had challenged Vocab to debate the Pews, and Vocab was the one who turned the offer down. I think we can all agree that some Israelites would be out there on YouTube declaring, or Facebook or other parts of social media, declaring that Richardson, quote unquote, destroyed vocab, and, you know, quoting verses like Proverbs 28:1, you know, saying the wicked flee when no man pursueth. But I'm not going to do that to Kelly Richardson here, as I think that would be unfair and inappropriate. With that, as I close this video, I once again want to ask a question, which was asked at least twice before in this video, maybe 3 times. Is Dr. Kelly using even scales? Were his depictions of these various controversies fair or accurate? I'll let each viewer decide for themselves. Oh, and on a closing note, in my next video, I hope to get into the subject of Benita Israel's interesting videos on the case for Arabic on the Pews. But until then, for now, I'll close here. As I always say, I look forward to the comments of others. Comments are always welcome. God bless.
Но когда мы оцениваем других людей, или когда оцениваем даже другие государства, другие народы, мы всегда как бы смотримся как будто в зеркало. Мы всегда там видим себя, потому что всегда перекладываем на другого человека то, чем мы сами дышим, чем мы являемся по сути. И вот, вы знаете, я вспоминаю, в детстве мы во дворе, когда спорили друг с другом, мы говорили так: кто как обзывается, тот так и называется. И это не случайно, это не просто детская поговорочка и шутка. Вот, смысл очень глубокий в этом, психологический. Мы всегда в другом человеке видим свои собственные качества и думаем, что он такой же, как и мы. И из этого исходя оцениваем его действия и даем оценку вообще.
What video you want me to take down, Pastor Kelly, boss? Boss, ruler of the kings of the earth. What video you want me to take down, Sister E? That's going to make y'all feel good. That's gonna